Thanks everybody for being here. So our first speaker is Gustavo Moreto from Unicamp, and he's going to talk about, He's going to talk about the development of Josephson junctions and characterization of superconducting transmon qubits in 3D cavities using low energy electron beam lithography. Gustavo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Hello everyone. I will talk about the results obtained during my master's project. And during the presentation, I will talk about the development of the technique to fabricate Josephson junctions using 30 kilovolts electron beam lithography systems. Here is the junctions that we achieved. This work led to a publication in a paper in the field. I will talk briefly about it. And finally, I will present the fabrication and characterization process of a transmon type superconducting qubit in a 3D cavity with the measurements that we made, a few ones presented here. So, to begin, a little bit about superconducting qubits and the Josephson junction fabrication process. The qubit type chosen to be studied in this work was a transmon type. And a transmon is formed by a capacitor in parallel with a Josephson junction. Josephson junction is formed by two superconductor weakly coupled, and it is the only non-dissipative, non-linear device we have so far in the electrodynamic quantum circuits. The transmon can be understood as a non-linear resonator. When in the quantized regime, its energy levels are no longer even in space, but exhibit an harmonicity that allows to control the excitation between the ground state and the first excited state, and the transmon can be used as a two energy level system. So by putting the transmon inside a cavity that confines the electromagnetic modes, a dipole field interaction occurs between them, and then the transmon level, the transmon state, influences the cavity state, and we can measure the transmon by probing the cavity. So in the process of fabricating the qubit, the first step is to develop the Josephson junction fabrication process. And for that we need to build a resist mask using electron beam lithography process, because the dimensions of the junction are in the orders of tens to hundreds of nanometers. And when the mask is ready, we do a double angle evaporation of aluminum with an oxidation step between. And with that we form a superconductor oxide superconductor junction. But we face a few challenges. The biggest one was this suspended bridge. It was breaking constantly, and that caused a short circuit between the two aluminum tracks. And to face that, we need to deal with the proximity effect. The proximity effect occurs when the electron beam strikes the sample and undergoes the scattering, and causes a sensibilization of surrounding areas, and in our case leading to the break of the bridge. So to solve this problem, we need to model this effect and make a dose distribution leading to a uniform dose around the layout. By doing that, we achieve a really good improvement, as we can see here. But even with that, the failure rate of the junctions we were testing in the beginning was still very high. So we need to look for other improvements, and we start to try a different layout. When we tried this L-shaped layout, we observe a really good improvement, reaching up to 86% of good junctions rate. Currently, we are over 95% of good junctions rate with low deviation in the resistance, and this is an image of the junctions we are working currently. Because of this improvement we had due to the layout change, that lead us to investigate the role of the layout plays in the junction performance. So we conduct a study testing different layouts of junctions and analyzing their performance. And the first step was to perform a detailed study of the electron beam scatter process in the lithography stage, and we observed that those deposited on the bridge area had a significant contribution from electrons originating in regions far from the bridge. And then we demonstrate that layouts that had a large area sensibilized around the bridge area lead to a higher dose and well-distributed dose on the bridge area, causing its formation and stability. We published a paper on this study where you can find more information if you want. So, with the Josephson junction process well established, that allow us to move forward to the qubit fabrication and measurement. And the qubit is formed by a 3D cavity with the transmon. So we design and produce a homemade copper cavity with a superconducting coil around to generate a magnetic flux that enables to tune the transmon energy. We designed, simulated, and then fabricated the transmon. Here I show you the design. These two rectangles forms the capacitor, and between them, connecting them, there are the junctions forming the transmon. Then the qubit is mounted on a dilution fridge to be cooled and then measured. The measurement system, The measurement system is composed by the dilution fridge with its different temperature stages. The qubits assemble on the coolest stage, the mixed chamber stage, which reaches up to 10 milli-K. It has a circuitry that allows us to send flux signals, microwave signals to probe the sample and bring the signals back to the temperature, to the room temperature. And for that we use attenuators and filters and also amplifiers. And we had to design and build a homemade measurement system that combined heterodyne technique plus digital homodyne technique, so we could measure the system, and we made that on our laboratory. Well, with that, with all good to go, the first thing we need to answer is the qubit alive? So to answer that, we perform a measurement called punch-out measurement. This measurement involves doing a spectroscopy cavity spectroscopy, with a high power signals. That in this condition the qubit presence influences is negligible, and then when lowering the signal power, the qubit presence starts to become noticeable and causes a shift in the cavity resonance frequency, as we can see in these two measurements. That's a sign that the qubit is there and properly working. The next measurement that also gives a sign that the qubit is working and it is there is a flux sweep map, where we again perform a cavity spectroscopy while varying the flux, the magnetic flux. With the change in the magnetic flux, the transmon energy changes and influences the cavity, changing the resonance frequency of the cavity. So here we can see the resonance frequency of the cavity varying sinusoidally with the changing of the flux, it is expected from the model. We also see these red lines and green lines that are the energy levels of the system that are simulated and plotted over the data. And we were able to observe and measure a voiding level between the cavity energy level with the omega 02 qubit energy level as well. Then next we enter in the time domain measurements, where we send specific frequency and pulse duration through the system. A first measurement in this condition is a Rabi oscillation, where we can obtain the P and P over 2 pulses times that allow us to put the qubit in an excited state and superposition state and manipulate state. Okay, and here we see a sinusoidal pattern changing the qubits through the excited state and ground state, as is expected for Rabi oscillations. We also did a chevron map sweeping the qubit frequency, excitation, and obtaining a pattern that it is expected for this type of measurement. Next, we characterize the decay time of the qubit by putting it in the excited state, waiting a variable t time, and then measuring the state of the system. And by doing that, we can characterize the exponential decay time of the system. For this measurement present here, we achieve 17 microseconds. But to access the stability of the system and the measurement, we repeated this measurement over 12 hours, and we can see that the results obtained are within the same order and stable, with the mean value of a decay time of 16 microseconds. And then finally, we did a Ramsey measurement protocol to characterize the dephase time of the qubit. The dephase time characterize how the system loses phase information when in a superposition state. And in this measurement, we obtain 7 microseconds. And again, we repeated the measure over 12 hours to access the stability of the process, and reaching a mean time of 6 microseconds. Well, that concludes the main results obtained during my master project. We were able to design, fabricate, measure and characterize a qubit, a transmon type qubit in a 3D cavity. Here I present the main parameters obtained for the device. We see that the characteristic times of the device are within the same order of other projects of the same type, that is a transmon, flux dependent in 3D copper cavities. Currently, our group had already measured, fabricated and measured many other qubits. We have other ongoing projects, as for example on my PhD project where I just started. I'm working with hybrid mechanical resonator coupled to qubit, aiming to investigate how the entanglement between mesoscopic systems it happens. We have also other projects. For example, Diego, who is here today, are working in building quantum processors up to 3 to 4 interacting qubits. Ednilson, who is also here today, are working on no-Euclidean lattice. Italo, who is finishes his master now, worked on magnetic microwire coupled to cavities, and other projects, for example, parametric amplifiers. This is our group, led by Professor Dr. Francisco Rochinol, and I wish to thank all of them. I wish to thank also our supporters, and I wish to thank you guys for your time as well.
Thanks a lot. We have definitely time for a few questions, so let's start.
thank you very much for your nice presentation. On slide 9, you mentioned about a capacitor where your qubit is in between. Is that correct?
Yes.
I was just wondering if the fact that your qubit is inside this kind of capacitor would make like a perturbation of your qubit due to the capacitance of the capacitor, of course.
Okay, let me see if I understood your question. So you were talking about this capacitor, right?
Yes, your qubit is inside, right?
Well, the qubit is made by also the capacitor. So on a schematic drawing of the qubit is here, where you have the Josephson junction in parallel with the capacitor.
Oh, okay.
So the capacitor composes the qubit.
Oh, I thought the Joseph junction was inside, between the plates of the capacitor.
Yeah, that forms a parallel connection between them.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
More questions?
Thanks, Gustavo. So you mentioned that the coupling that you have in there, if I'm not mistaken, last table is like 0.2 gigahertz. The coupling rate between the qubit and the cavity itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, this G factor,
Yeah.
0.26 gigahertz.
So then maybe I miss like how you can have like sort of like strong coupling between the cavity and the qubit, because they are like far apart by like 1.6 gigahertz.
Yes.
What is the mechanism that make them hybridize if the G is not on the order of like 1 point something gigahertz?
Okay, so the measurement process occurs in the dispersive regime. So we are not in a regime where they are hybridized. Sorry, and that is enough coupling strength to the transmon state influences the cavity frequency. So they are not in a hybridized state, but the transmon excitation causes a shift in the cavity frequency, and then we probe the cavity, and by getting this shift, we can see if the transmon is in the ground state or in the excited state. Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so perhaps I can go with the question. I'm not an experimentalist at all, so I was wondering what is the long-term plan of this kind. I mean, I know that, let's say, superconducting qubits are already realized by important companies and so on. So the goal is to be as good as them, or you are proposing a different idea that could be better in the future, or can you comment a bit on that?
Okay, so in our group, in our laboratory, the qubit is one device that is it's essential for other projects to come along. Our main goal is not to do quantum computation with hundreds or even thousands of qubits, because that demands a huge amount of money and people, and we don't have that so easily. But the qubit allows to study many other systems, because, for example, entanglement of mesoscopic devices, the qubit is like the interface between them, where you can put a non-classical state in a classical resonator. So it's in that line that we are working.
Okay, if there are no more questions, I think we can go with Laurent. So thanks a lot, Gustavo, again.
Got it on the wrong way around. Yeah. Hello. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's just the next slide. Okay. Okay, go.
Okay, so our next speaker is Flintoft from IOP Publishing, and she's gonna teach us about how to avoid predatory journals, right? So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me today. So the reason why I am talking to you now is because of an initiative called Purpose-Led Publishing. So this was formed due to a coalition that was made between 3 society physics publishers who have ensured to set up some industry standards that are underpinned by responsible publishing practices. So the 3 publishers have come together and made certain promises that make up these standards. So, for example, 100% of funds will be invested back into science. Research integrity will always be put in ahead of profits. And the content that reaches publication is impactful to the scholarly record, etc., etc. So, as mentioned, as part of this initiative, I'm, and we're wanting to engage more with our communities. I'm speaking to you today about avoiding predatory journals, so that you can recognise these and you're equipped with the tools to identify them. So yeah, as mentioned, my name is Lauren. I'm the Research Integrity Manager at the Institute of Physics Publishing. So that is one of the 3 publishers that is part of Purpose-Led Publishing. So my job is to lead a team of research integrity experts who investigate any allegations of potential misconduct concerning our content. So if there are potentially any inaccuracies, this includes like plagiarism, data fabrication, etc. My team investigate and ensure that we correct the record. So in terms of what I'll cover off today, before I go over the bad and the ugly, I thought I should probably cover the good. So I'll talk you through responsible publishing practices. Then, of course, what are predatory journals, the rise and fall of Beale's list, exposing predatory activities, of course, how to verify a journal, some final takeaways, and then there'll be time for questions and recommended reads. So before I get into it, could I please have a show of hands? How many of you have heard of predatory journals? Oh, a few, okay. Okay, I've got my work cut out for me today then to give you some new information. So, responsible publishing practices. So, the purpose of scholarly publishers is to, in a robust and fair manner, manage the peer review process of scholarly content. So, that of course it is subject to. So, if a work meets the journal's criteria, ethical policies, and it survives the peer review process, it is then published on the publisher's platform. It's even potentially made available in print, and is then widely distributed, to the community. It's also we also do a great deal of work around like preservation and archiving to ensure the content is available in perpetuity. Journals usually publish a set number of issues and volumes in a year. Some have what are termed as like special issues, so these often focus on a particular topic or concept and are kind of in addition to these regular issues. The journal will have a clearly defined scope, and the academic discipline it publishes, like sort of around the academic discipline it publishes, and will have guidelines for authors that clearly set out how it operates peer review, its manuscript criteria, and the ethical policies. So, any fees authors incur for publications should be stated upfront and are usually charged if the work is going to be published under an open access license. So that's where authors pay to publish rather than researchers pay to read. There will be an editorial board, and this is usually led by an editor-in-chief. So, on this premise, this means that journals should immediately reject content that does not meet its criteria and comply with its policies. It should select appropriate reviewers who should provide constructive feedback to the authors, and if, say, the reviews fall short of this, they should promptly select a new reviewer. They should ensure that the the work that authors submit for consideration, if there is any third-party content being reused, which is the case in most instances, that permission is cleared to comply with copyright law. The work should be typeset and subsequently widely distributed and indexed in certain discovery sites, and then further archived with preservation organisations. So this includes like Locks, Clocks, Portico, etc. So the content that reaches publication should make an impactful contribution to the existing body of knowledge. Journals expect content to be original. Now, there are a few exceptions, one being, say, like translations, but they very much are exceptions. Novelty is an expectation that can vary from journal to journal. Again, this should be clearly stipulated on the journal's website. All content published needs to meet expected ethical standards. So this is such as that the work is fully referenced, that any conflicts of interest are declared to the editor upon submission, that the work's not under active consideration elsewhere, so it's received a final decision, i.e. a rejection, before then submitted for consideration in another journal. Content that contains or kind of involves unethical practices and reaches publication erodes trust in science. So it can lead to future researchers unknowingly, and sometimes even knowingly, building upon inaccurate content. So responsible publishers understand this, and they work incredibly hard to prevent ethically dubious content reaching publication. They consider themselves to be custodians of the content, and they take this responsibility extremely seriously. So they do this by ensuring there are stringent checks and balances upon submission, and they investigate cases of potential ethical misconduct promptly. So on to the ugly. So predatory journals fall short of all of these expectations, with their practices often not aligning with the fundamental purpose of scholarly publishing. It can be difficult to define what a predatory journal is, because it's a very catch-all term for journals that don't provide the services that authors expect them to do. What they are most known for is charging for submission or publication without sending the content out to peer review. They also employ aggressive commissioning tactics, so they often spam authors with requests to submit. They also really aggressively target potential reviewers, trying their very best to get them to review, and they even do it to entice people to join their editorial boards, or they don't even ask, they just include their name on the journal page. So the following are other markers. So accepting articles quickly with little or no peer review or quality control. Interference with the editorial process so as to ensure acceptance of low quality content. Notifying academics of article fees only after the paper is accepted. That's a really main hallmark there. They should be stated up front. Appointing fake academics to editorial boards. I have seen this. Completely fictitious people are listed on the editorial board. Absolutely terrifying. Allow editors to publish repeatedly in the journals they command. So editor-in-chiefs and editorial board members do often publish within their journals, but if they overly publish, it can, it's fair enough to think it's a bit of a vanity project, that they're maybe, not considering other original, impactful articles. And as I mentioned before, journals are so notoriously tight for space, so it is potentially robbing other authors of the opportunities to publish. They may mimic the name or website style of more established journals. You find, especially journals with Springer and Elsevier, are often replicated just simply because they're so well known. They make misleading claims about the publishing operations, such as false location, and citing fake or non-existent impact factors. So, these are the hallmarks to look out for. So, details are often scant on author guidelines and ethical policies, and papers are often way out of scope of the journal. Now, that is if they even have a scope. So, some are so broad, you can genuinely see articles on maths sit alongside papers on history within the one journal. So, there effectively isn't a scope. Given it's such a broad term that it covers a range of hallmarks, there are some journals that exhibit all of these hallmarks. They're just absolutely textbook predatory journals, and there are some that only maybe display one or two. The term predatory journal is thought to have been coined by Jeffrey Beall. So he, in the 2010s, was a librarian at the University of Colorado, and he published articles on predatory tactics used by journals. He started to look into the phenomenon when he received numerous requests from dubious journals to join their editorial boards. So the practices he found are low price points for APCs, so article processing charges, inflated commitments on behalf of the publishers, and creation of websites that mimic legitimate journals. So after making his discovery, he created Beall's List. Many of you may have heard of this. This was a website that listed predatory journals he could find so as to warn others of the unethical practices. So he used the following criteria to include a publisher. 2 or more journals have duplicate editorial boards. So that's where the same editorial board features on more than one journal. That's just highly improbable. There are little to no geographical diversity amongst the editorial board members, and that's especially concerning if it states that it's an international journal. The publisher has no policies and practices about digital preservation. So if for whatever reason it closes, it shuts down, it means that the content will then become no longer accessible. So this is particularly problematic because say one of you cites a work, you're including it even say in your PhD thesis, in an article you're about to publish. If that work is then no longer accessible and taken down, your work's now incorrect. And especially if you're citing a very important article, that's really quite, it's bad. We take that extremely seriously, and we don't. This is why you may find a lot of publishers are really reluctant to withdraw content. We just think the work's so impactful, it's probably been widely cited. If it's taken down, it's going to cause absolute chaos. Also, another criteria that he used is if the publisher locks down the PDF. So what this means is that the text within it isn't readable. So this means it's particularly difficult for plagiarism softwares to detect overlap. So us publishers, we do use a software provided by Turnitin called Cross-Ref Similarity Check, and it does only work if it's readable text that has been copied. The name of the journal doesn't align with the journal's mission, and the publisher falsely claims to have its content indexed in legitimate abstracting and indexing services, so Web of Science, Scopus, etc. So given these publishers were making a hell of a lot of money, either deceiving authors into publishing with them, or targeting those who likely did know but were just so incredibly desperate to have their work published, they didn't take too kindly to being called out in this way. So Beall subsequently faced legal threats. He also faced allegations of ethical misconduct, like requests to investigate him by his university. Which led to his demise effectively. So the screenshot on this slide is someone who's tried to basically preserve this list. Now, there were other attempts to highlight predatory activities in some journals. What is on this slide is an actual published article. It is the same sentence repeated over 10 pages. There's an abstract, there's an introduction, there's a method. He's even fashioned it into a wonderful graph. There's graphs and everything. This is my personal favorite. So even before Beall's List in 2005, computer scientists David Mazières and Eddie Colonna created this highly profane paper as a joke, of course, to send in replying to unwanted conference invitations. And this basically made the rounds online, and it was picked up by an Australian computer scientist named Peter van der Ploeg, and it was sent in to the International Journal of Advanced Computer Technology in response to spam he received from the journal. So, it was subsequently published. They asked for a $150 fee for publication. Apparently a reviewer rated it as excellent. So John Bannon also decided to submit fake articles with completely fictitious authors and institutions, although they looked more like real articles. This is obviously not. So what he did was include significant but easy to spot errors within the papers that he was submitting, and he found that 82% of journals on Beall's list that he submitted to and that survived peer review published these works with these really significant errors in. So this proved that the list was highly accurate, but then there were those that used that 18% as a reason to kind of discredit Beall, and this, ultimately led to its demise. So while the example on screen is pretty hilarious, it does highlight the very real problem that predatory journals face. You know, you should be able to trust that if something is published online, it's gone through a clear vetting process, it's published, it should be accurate, you should be able to trust it. Alas, not. They don't all look like this, and it means that as well as considering which journals you consider to submit to, it's also considering which papers you cite. If the journal that the work you're considering to cite has been published, the work's been published in a predatory journal, then you may be building on inaccurate research. It's a complete waste of time, effort, money, and as I mentioned before, it erodes trust in science publishing inaccurate content. So, the fall of Beall's list has understandably made others hesitant to create lists of potential predatory journals to kind of warn others. In turn, it's difficult for prospective authors to know for certain whether a journal is predatory or not. So not all articles they publish are, as I say, as obviously flawed as the one on the previous slide. So there are several organisations attempting to do this. So one is Cable's predatory report. So this is a pay-to-view list of predatory journals. It gives you a risk factor. It kind of gives a score of how much risk there is with this journal. And then there is also, the second is predatoryjournals.org. So they've gone to great lengths to hide their identities so as to not face the same fate as Beall did. So whilst this website is a great resource, it's not necessarily updated very often. So it means that the omission of a journal from this list doesn't mean that it's not a predatory journal. Recent research by Taskin et al. In their preprint, Not All Predators Are the Same, Exploring the Spectrum of Questionable Journals, has revealed that 24% of journals listed on this website they became inaccessible after they were added to this list. So it means that they shut themselves down or they rebranded so as to evade scrutiny. So, with all this in mind, how on earth do you check whether a journal is predatory or not? How can you verify that with confidence? How do you differentiate between maybe a small independent journal that's just starting up and a predatory one? And also, how do you recognize whether maybe a journal has predatory tendencies, as it were? So, have no fear, there is Think, Check, Submit. I'm hoping some of you have heard of this. So it's a great resource. It kind of prompts questions for you to ask so as to kind of verify the journal. So the first is, do you or your colleagues know of the journal? Have you read articles in it before? Is the name recognizable? Can you easily identify and contact the publisher? For a lot of predatory journals, they'll have an address listed on the website, but you can't really contact them. There's one email address for all queries, which is crazy. That just shouldn't be the case. Is the journal clear about the peer review that it operates? So does it set out that it will send the content out to independent reviewers but associated with the journal, or are they completely external? The journal shouldn't guarantee acceptance or very short peer review time. That's technically not possible. So if they do, it's a lie. Are articles indexed or archived in dedicated services? So is your work going to be indexed in discovery sites? does the publisher ensure long-term archiving and preservations? Like I mentioned before, Locks, Clocks, Portico, these are organizations that do that work. Is it clear what fees will be charged? So are they really clear on sort of why you're being charged, what the amount is for? Are the guidelines provided for authors on the publisher's website? So do they explain the licensing policy around like an open access license? If it allows subscription publication, does it outline the rights that you retain? So what that means is that you assign the copyright over to the publisher. But of course, as the author, you should retain certain rights, like the right to be able to reuse portions of your work in future works, share a number of PDFs with friends, family, you know. So it should outline that very clearly. Is the publisher a current member of recognised industry initiatives? So on that last point, Think, Check, Submit, you know, advises you to keep an eye out for these, like association with organisations such as these ones. So there are a variety out there that effectively, if a publisher aligns with and adopts, it means that they meet certain expected industry standards and responsible publishing practices. So for example, the first one is the Committee on Publication Ethics. So this is an organisation that advises publishers on how to investigate cases of ethical misconduct in a robust and fair manner. And if a journal is a member of this organisation, then as I've mentioned, they meet certain standards, like responsible publishing practices. The DOI logo, that represents, it kind of signals whether a publisher uses a digital object identifier, so whether they provide permanent stable links for content. Again, it's around that point of ensuring that the content's always accessible. DOJA stands for the Directory of Open Access Journals. So in order for a journal to be to be a part of DOJA, it has to adopt certain principles around like transparency. It goes through rigorous assessments and has to meet set standards that they outline. So predatory journals are aware of all this, and they will claim that they are aligned with organisations such as these, so as to sort of appear more legitimate and transparent, that as if they do align with the standards set by these organisations. So it's incredibly important to check whether they actually are aligned. So these are screenshots that I've taken from known predatory journals. They are claiming to be associated with these organisations. I would bet a serious amount of money that they're not. So this is why it's incredibly important to verify this. I would go on to these websites and actually check whether the journal is listed in them, seeing as they are particularly naughty and like to include the logo on websites. It's important to mention, though, that certain legitimate journals are associated with these organisations, but maybe don't include the logo on their website, but it doesn't mean that they're not associated with it. So that's why it's important to check the source. So in terms of a checklist of things to kind of work through whenever you're assessing journals, of course, Think, Check, Submit. That is the absolute main resource that I would use, and working through all those questions, you'll be able to verify whether a journal is legitimate or not. Of course, verify information, so COPE, DOJA, like search for editorial board members. I'd just recommend selecting a few, just randomly select a few of the supposed editorial board members. You'll soon know if they're fake or if they're not actually associated with the journal. Do check the predatory journal list to help reaffirm suspicions, but as I mentioned, if a journal's not listed on one of these websites doesn't mean that it's necessarily not a predatory journal. It's maybe that they've not updated it regularly. So yeah, do proactively make those checks. And finally, always remain vigilant. So don't necessarily judge a book by its cover. There are some journals that are just small independents, like it might look like something out of the 80s, their website, but that doesn't mean that they're predatory. And also, on the flip side, if a journal looks really well polished, they've clearly paid a lot of money for a website designer, doesn't mean that they are necessarily legitimate. So thanks so much for listening. So if you have have any questions that come to mind now, do fire away, but otherwise I have included my email address at the bottom of the slide in case you wanted to contact me afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Roland, for this talk. We have plenty of time for questions.
So let me start by saying I think physics is much better than other fields, but I'm amazed that the publishing of physics papers hasn't changed in the last 60 years. And I mean, the people doing all the work usually aren't getting paid, the referees.
Yeah.
So I would say, of course, some are less predatory, some are more predatory. But I think the physics community could get together and essentially wipe out all the publishers if they wanted to. Put an online site saying, this paper is merit 1, this paper is merit 2, this paper is merit 3.
Mm.
That's essentially why people publish it, to get some accreditation when they apply for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just a comment. But I don't know, is there any moves? For example, you didn't mention ChatGPT or anything. Are there any moves to try to modify how this whole structure works, or is it that we just keep going with it and going for the list?
Yeah, very interesting question. Oh, the mention of ChatGPT makes me shudder. The amount of people who are trying to submit to us, and I can pretty much guarantee the other two publishers right now where they've written articles using ChatGPT, and it's just absolute gibberish. It's such poor quality. If anybody, again, wants a really funny example, like the one a few slides ago, just search Frontiers Rat. Just do that now and, yeah. Yeah, Frontiers Rat, and you will soon see what I mean. So in terms of the structure of publishing, there are some that are trying to provide different ways to operate peer review, because of course, like the peer review process was first founded in like the 1700s. It's absolutely ancient. And there are people trying to do like open peer review. You can put the article on the website and it's already available and then being reviewed by peers, etc. I think that there is some call for things to change, but equally, from what we see, I think a lot of authors still do kind of support the old regime, as it were. So the reason why I say this is because there's such a push for open access now, making sure content is completely openly accessible. It doesn't sit behind a paywall. But the number of authors who submit to publishers still under subscription license, so the work does sit behind the paywall, is still significantly high, which is really quite interesting given, as I say, that push towards open access. So it's interesting. There are certain people, companies trying to encourage this change, but we are still seeing the appetite for people to go down the traditional routes. So yeah.
Other?
Maybe a comment, not a question. So, thank you for your talk. It was very interesting to see like this gathering of a single presentation. One curiosity, so only the physics institutes that you are coding there like gather together, or you guys just look for the physics? For example, like IEEE and Optica, former OSA, they are also like community type journals, in the sense that they are like based on a association.
Yeah.
Do they also join you guys on that or no? That's one question.
Yeah.
And the second, I have the feeling that these predatory journals sort of like appear because there are so many people trying to publish and so many like emails to referee that we receive nowadays.
Yeah.
That sometimes you are like just like, okay, maybe I'll just like say no to all of them. But then once you say no to all of them, you are also not being one of the referees that get that piece of junk there and say like, this is a piece of junk. No? So how do you then engage the community to be more on top of like of this sort of like journals
Yeah.
and then actually referee for them, because the thing is that when I get one of these emails, I just say no.
Yeah.
I don't even bother like looking over. I just say like no.
Yeah.
And but again, if there's someone like refereeing for them, so how we can as a community actually gather and then be more aware of that.
Yeah. So in answer to your first question, so the reason why it's the 3 publishers that have come together, we're all a very similar size, we're all society-led, so we're not commercial companies, we don't have shareholders, so we genuinely work to invest back into science. So especially in terms of the Institute of Physics, it does great work to try and encourage more women into physics, etc. And the other publishers do very similar things. So that's why we're together. Now, if there are, other publishers out there that face, the same kind of unique challenges that we see with physics content and, want to do more work in that field, then I think it is something that, would be considered. It's just that, we've come together because we share many commonalities. In terms of your second question, so certainly at IOP, what we offer is a peer review excellence program. So this is training around peer review, kind of what on earth you do when you receive that invitation, how you detect ChatGPT use, etc., inaccuracies. So that's certainly a resource that can be used to kind of increase your knowledge, and you'll be able to detect, inaccurate content. In terms of trying to understand whether a journal is predatory and it's asked you to review, I would use these, the Think, Check, Submit, check the predatoryjournals.org, etc. Same still applies. It can be really difficult to tell, but you find that often with predatory journals, they'll really aggressively contact you. You'll say no, and then 2 hours later they'll be like, but what about this paper? And you're like, no. And then a few hours later, but this one? And you're like, just leave me alone. That's often a predatory tendency. So I hope that answers your question.
More questions? Perhaps I have 2 or 3 that goes together. I mean, one is about more or less related to that question. I mean, right now I will say most of the referees and most of the efforts that are asked to young scientists, typically postdocs.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in their career, they get nothing out of doing a good referee. I mean, it's when you apply for jobs, the kind of reward that you get for being a good referee is 0, not even epsilon is 0.
Yeah.
So, do you have any plan to make, let's say, profitable in the terms of CV or whatever? I mean, to change the state of the field, because right now, being a referee, it's essentially going to do a charity activity in some sense. So.
Yeah. What a question. So, I mean, this is something that the publishing industry is very aware of. As I say, it's sort of a product of a really old system. To say peer review, peer-reviewed journals first started cropping up in the 1700s. In terms of that recognition, I believe Publons, you can you can verify whether you have provided a review for a paper. In terms of why the system's set up that way, that is a massive topic. The certain issues that come to mind. So if publishers did start to pay reviewers, there is a conflict of interest issue. Yeah, there's pros and cons on both sides. It is a really, really difficult topic. But as I say, I know that there are certain initiatives occurring to try and give that recognition. Like I say, I'm pretty sure it's Publons.
What is the position of... I see that certain publishers, probably I never seen from one of those, but certain publishers are encouraging the referee to sign the record. What is the position? That I understand that can be problematic, but at the same time give a little bit of visibility to the referee. I mean, if the referee does a serious job and can get a little bit of visibility because he or she signed the result. What is the position of IOP, APS, and IOP on that?
Is that around reviewers getting that recognition? So what our position is? Did you say if they cite the work or?
No, I'm saying that the referee can sign his or her record and say this is my record.
So it's
Oh, I see.
It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
anonymous. There are
yeah,
Yeah, site post gives you the option to do this to referee. For instance.
yeah.
So
I've got you now,
I have
yeah.
a site post right now that's a referee, and 2 referees are anonymous. 1 decided to sign their name.
right. And
It is anonymous.
I sometimes signed
Is
my
that during the
referee.
process?
Site post, no.
Yeah.
So during the process, but then, no?
No, the
Not
referee.
even like,
Before I responded, I had the name. They
Wow.
choose to do it. So the referee decides what they like.
Yeah, yeah. So I know quite a few publishers. So this includes IOP, and I think the others too are adopting transparent peer review. So that's where the peer review process is exactly the same as it is now. So it's either single or double anonymous. So single is where the reviewer knows the author's identity, author doesn't know the reviewer's. Double is where neither one knows the identity. The peer review process occurs, article is published, and then the reviews are published online with your name. Yeah. So that is something that we are certainly trialing, that many of our journals have adopted. So like you say, you get that recognition. So I know that that is something that is occurring at lightning speed. A lot of publishers do offer that now.
And let me go with the final question, right, which I think is
Yeah.
quite modern, so to say. Recently, we are assisting at several cases from journals that nobody will judge being predatory of very bad experience of retraction of papers. Not based on papers that are wrong, genuinely wrong, and that is perfectly fine. In science, it's perfectly fine that you do something and then you
Yeah.
recognize it wrong. And
Yeah.
that shouldn't be retracted because
Yeah.
it's part of the process. But there are very
Yes.
well-known examples of papers that are retracted
Yeah.
for very bad practices. Do you think this is a criterion to judge that particular journal as predatory? If that is the case, there are
Yeah.
journals that nobody will judge as predatory that should enter in that list.
Yeah, I
What
think
is your
if
position?
if a journal has retracted a significant amount of content, that is a massive red flag. Whether it's necessarily predatory, because as I say, that's such a broad term, certainly means that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, conducting really detailed, stringent checks. So yeah, papers should be retracted if they contain inaccuracies, they're fundamentally flawed. What a retraction does is mark the content as null and void. So it does still remain accessible on the website. As I mentioned before, withdrawing is usually a big no-no. So it does actually stay on the website for transparency. It's watermarked with the term retracted and has a very clear notice to explain the concerns. Usually if there's research, if the retraction is due to research errors, that can't be helped. We're all human, sometimes mistakes are made. Yeah, then
shouldn't be even retracted.
Yeah,
It's part of the process.
Yeah, then they're retracted, and journals that are responsible usually offer republication. So they'll say to the authors, look, if you can go away, rerun your experiments, you can correct this error, then we will actually publish the revised version. We'll link the retracted and revised so that it's clear what's occurred here. And yeah, those sort of retractions are viewed very differently to ones, say, for actual fabrication and really, really bad stuff. So yeah, if there's a lot of retractions, that does kind of mean something's gone really wrong.
Okay. That could change the list quite a lot in recent days. Okay.
So, sorry, I didn't want to. So why is it conflict of interest to pay a referee? What's the conflict?
Because it could encourage them to provide a positive report for a paper that's
they
not.
get the money if it's positive or negative. Why should
Yeah, well, it can potentially encourage people to provide a more positive report. Like you say, it is pretty sensible. Hopefully most people would say, okay, whether it's positive or negative, like I'm providing that review, like that's fine, and I receive payment. But it will encourage some. They may think that they need to provide a more positive review, and also if the review's not necessarily that detailed, it doesn't provide that constructive criticism. Genuinely, not all reviews do. There are quite a few that are not ideal, let's say. There are even some where the reviewer encourages the author to cite numerous works that are their own. Sometimes that is legitimate, sometimes not so much. I have seen reports that encourage the reviewer to cite 15 of their papers. Yeah, so
he doesn't have to choose a bad reviewer.
but you don't necessarily know if a reviewer is bad or not if you've not used them before. There's definitely, yeah, I'm maybe not giving this point a lot of justice. There's plenty about this kind of online. There are current debates going on, and that can certainly provide a bit more detail.
Basis referees. I think the JF referees were fine. I never heard any. Okay. Oh yeah, ChatGPT, is that plagiarism or not?
It really depends where it sourced that content and how the content that it produces has been used. So the problem is you don't necessarily know if it's plagiarism or not. You can't necessarily verify the sources that it's using. And it depends also how you use it as well. Like if you've asked it to write the majority of your paper, then it's not actually your work, but you're claiming it to be.
I'm not saying it's easy to trace. I'm just asking, is it the policy of the publication to say if it's ChatGPT, then it's plagiarism?
Oh, no. So, so certainly, yeah, so our policy at IOP is that, you know, it's an incredible tool, like all LLM models. There are responsible ways of using it, like the incredible things that you hear in the news, like how it's advancing science, like especially detecting like new antibiotics, etc. We do really encourage that, like we support that. What we don't allow is irresponsible uses that cause then inaccuracies in the content. So if you've used ChatGPT, you've done a good old copy and paste and the content's wrong, you are ultimately responsible for that, and that is something that does not align with our policy. So. No, so if you've used it in the course of your research, then it is often good practice to explain that. So like how you would use MATLAB to produce a graph, you would just naturally include that in your paper. But if you've just used it to support with like improving language, etc., we do not require declarations. Some publishers do. My view is that in like 5 years' time, it's going to be like using a calculator. So we don't want like 5 years worth of content with a random statement on it, because it's just then part and parcel of the process. You don't declare when you've used a calculator. So that's been our view. So we really want to support our communities with its use. It's just, yeah, if it causes inaccuracies and unethical issues, then that's not okay.
Maybe in the period where calculators were producing many, many errors in their regular use, might have been an idea to say use a calculator.
Potentially.
If you used a Babbage computational machine to do all your figures, you might say that.
Yeah, potentially.
More questions? Comments? Okay. No. Okay. Thank you very much. See you all at 1:30.
There should be lunch upstairs if people want. I mean, if they want, they can go to the plenty of places.
What time should we be back?
1:30.
1:30.